all of that. Hey, Bill Davis, can you hear me okay? Is this all right? One sec. One sec. Bill Davis, can you hear me now? No. Thank you. All right. One sec. Thanks, y'all. We're going in just a few. Test, test. Is that better? Neil? Bill Davis, is that better? Is that better? Can you hear me now? All right, then. All right. Can everybody hear me okay out there? We're going to go ahead and call this town hall to order. Really, really appreciate all of you being here today. I think that we know just a cursory view, a glance at the news right now, the moment of chaos that we're in, the moment of intense infighting, a moment of dysfunction throughout the very tippy top levels of our federal and state governments. We all know that this is not a time to make decisions in a rushed fashion. The decisions that we make about the future of our healthcare infrastructure and our hospital governance are going to be with us for decades. It involves billions of dollars. It involves every single person in our community at one point or another in their lives. And we must be very deliberative about that. So I'm about to bring up our panelists, but I want to say booking and organizing this town hall was rather interesting because there seems to be a pall of silence. There seems to be a shroud of secrecy, frankly, around the entire thing. And that's what makes this conversation even more important tonight. I'm really glad to have all of you as be part of it. So, in reverse order of their seniority, our first panelist is, I believe we're in your district right now. A fighter for justice and the public interest, first elected to the city commission in 2022, up for re-election in 2026, a dear, dear friend of our party and of common sense and the public interest, Commissioner David O'Keefe. Our next panelist that we'll bring up here is a city commissioner since 2018. He is one of the most consequential city commissioners that we've seen in many years. Full disclosure, he is my boss as well at my day job. He has been at the forefront of this issue from day zero on this thing, calling it what it is, calling out the secrecy, and calling for an open, transparent, honest conversation. So we'd like to thank and welcome to our panel, City Commissioner Jeremy Matlow. We would also like to welcome City Commissioner, who has also been you can always find her on the right side of every issue, time after time after time. City Commissioner Jack Porter was first elected in 2020 and handily re-elected last August outright, avoiding a runoff because she is so popular and so in line with the values of our community. She is also, interestingly, in this conversation, a double graduate of FSU, maybe triple. She has public policy and urban and regional planning graduate degrees from FSU, and is very much a part of our community and that community. So we'd like to welcome to the panel City Commissioner Jack Porter. And finally, last but very much not least, one of the longest serving elected officials in all of Florida 67 counties, y'all. County Commissioner Bill Proctor is a fixture. He is a legend. He is a clear voice for the side of the public interest and the side of the people. We're very, very excited to have him tonight. County Commissioner Bill Proctor. So we have a load of questions that we've received from members of the party all up and down the spectrum of belief. And I just wanted to kind of start it off, though, before we get into question, with just an opening statement from each of you, if you would, to kind of situate us and orient us in this entire ordeal, this entire saga of the FSU state government proposed changes, some called takeover of Tallahassee Memorial Hospital. I would recommend, in any order that you guys want, we can start with Commissioner O'Keefe.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right. This is a very, very important issue, which is something everyone in this room already knows. I am here to speak up for keeping community control and public ownership of our TMH hospital at a time when we see the state administration push every lever they have to disenfranchise people and take away rights and inclusivity to people in the LGBTQ plus community and women and their health choices. We cannot hand over that to a part of a state agency. This is a major issue that affects everyone in our community. This last year, I got to participate in TMH's Community Health Needs Assessment, which gave me an inside look of just how far-reaching their impact is in our region here in the surrounding counties for our overall community health. And I don't think we should trust any part of the state administration that we've recently seen with that process.
Hey, good evening. I'm Tallahassee City Commissioner Jeremy Matlow. I'm here for a few reasons. Number one, I think it's important that we recognize that Tallahassee Memorial Hospital is a community-owned hospital. That means it belongs to all of you. It's your hospital from its creation. So we're here today because we heard rumblings of backroom conversations and backroom deals that were happening to transfer or sell that asset to other entities before anybody was even aware of it. City Commission wasn't made aware of it. The public wasn't made aware of it. And my belief is with an asset that's worth $1 billion that's owned by the people, they should always have a say in that process. They should actually probably be the initiators of that process, and they shouldn't find out things on the back end. I'm a lifelong Tallahassee resident. I was raised by a single mother of 4 kids on the south side of town. I know what it's like to only go to the hospital or go to a doctor because of great programs like Medicaid and Medicare. I know what it's like to have a community hospital to go to that's going to take care of you whether you can afford to pay or not. And I think so many people in our community have had that experience at TMH. And I think the concern we're hearing from people is once we give away community control, we don't have any say at all anymore in the direction of healthcare in our community. So as a city, as citizens who own this hospital, do we want to be in the driving seat? Do we want to make sure the people who are making the decisions at our hospital are vetted by their elected officials, or do we want to give that away? And we don't want to cast bad aspersions on anywhere else, but we've seen what happens when state entities become political. We've seen it in universities. We've seen it in FAMU. We've seen it where politicians get appointed to roles that they might not be qualified for. And do we want that seeping in to local healthcare? So that's the question, I think, that's largely on our mind is, do we want to keep our hospital or do we want to give it away?
Thank you, Commissioner Matlow. Commissioner Porter.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jack Porter. I'm here as much to speak to this issue as I am really to hear from you all about the concerns and questions you have, because we really haven't had the opportunity to have a community conversation about not only TMH as a community asset, but also just public health in this community generally and the future of public health. And the central question needing to be what is in the best interest of Tallahassee residents, and especially those of us who might not have insurance and who need that care and who won't have an alternative option if there is not a public hospital. So that is where I'm coming from. I agree with the statements that my colleagues have made, but I think that this is an opportunity for this community to have a bigger conversation about how we meet the public health needs of this community moving forward. Because I think before we had this conversation, or before this specific topic was raised, that was a conversation that needed to happen, being that TMH is a community-owned asset. So I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I hope that we stay engaged as these conversations move forward, because I certainly have concerns that I've raised about what this process has looked like, why so many people were caught off guard, and it's just not a way for the city to be a partner to people who have been good partners to us. So I'm looking forward to this conversation and seeing the community needs come first.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Porter. Commissioner Bill Proctor.
Good evening, everyone. Ryan, thank you for holding this very important meeting. I was talking to Commissioner Matlow and said, Florida State ought to just put this new hospital in terms of stadium that costs $1 jillion. And they right next door, medical schools like Humpty Dumpty. and the big old athletic house, and we paid, I think, $28 million out of Blueprint. I'd rather give them $28 million out of Blueprint and go build a hospital. It seems that their values and a bunch of money invested in the football field. Go build yourself a hospital. You don't get hours for $3.99. FSU is closed down. Pensacola Street took it to make it part of the athletic complex. They closed down Woodward Street, just took it. They got the Civic Center. They didn't take that one, but they did pay us a healthy amount, $1 for the Civic Center. And when Florida State, which has one of the largest law firms in the state of Florida, it's called the Florida State College of Law. When they decide they want something, they got plenty of personnel that can look it up. This is not a time where we relinquish public assets, in particular when the state of Florida is driven by ideology and not qualifications. I don't like the person who don't believe that we ought to have vaccines. Some people in the state don't believe we ought to have fluoride in the water. It's just crazy ass people running stuff in the realm of health, medical science, and the LAPO them stupid. Would he become the next dean? Old Abdul LAPO? I don't know what the LAPO gonna do, but they lapidate all of our systems. So I'm just saying, based on what I've seen, y'all, not throwing shade at nobody. It's just what we've seen. Outstanding doctor came up from the Board of Governors this week, and they said he had something to do with DEI. Well, hell, I'm DEI. When you look at me, I'm DEI. Man, fantastically qualified from London to all the way over to all the big bigs, and his ideology was wrong. What about qualifications? Then a couple of weeks on the 18 fam, you got a lady, UM sent somebody who was eminently qualified, president of the University of Michigan. FAMU has a president, their choice. Somebody come from a charter cable company. Give me a break. So when we're looking at the state right now, they are not fit. They're not mature. They're not grown to evaluate and make decisions based upon qualifications and those things that add up to traditional values of getting the smartest, bestest, brightest people. Finally, when it comes to a teaching hospital, when you have doctors, professional, on the floor, those doctors make rounds 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning. The doctors are there. When you get a teaching hospital, you're going to get third-year students who are going to be guided by fourth-year students making rounds. And if there's a problem, call the doctor. He's somewhere on the golf course. You try to get to him, or he will direct you what to do. The quality of on-the-floor care will diminish if you go to a teaching hospital versus what we have now. So quality of care, in my humble observations, spending a year as a chaplain, student chaplain at Boston Children's Hospital, that's not enough to be, qualified, but I was there for a year as a chaplain student at Boston Children's Hospital. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, can we get a thank you for our panel? Really go ahead. We're gonna open it up, the floor for questions in just a few, but we're gonna have a few questions that have been submitted beforehand.
Can we add, how many of y'all is doctors or nurses or pharmacists or stuff like that? Any medical like people here? Just a couple of two. Okay, 3. All right. So we got 3, and that community has not been engaged. We ain't heard from the docs what this means to them. We saw a group shut down, close down, dissolve. We know that Health and Human Services is cutting back. We know the NIH is cutting back. These agencies that undergird health is cutting back. What in the hell timing is this for a teaching hospital or medical school to be opening when the folks who are funding research and all of that is cutting back? Will we be going up on the utility bill commissioners to pay for it? No.
The point's really well made. I mean, we are talking about a time in our state of unprecedented chaos when it comes to the politicization of our state universities and our agencies in general. Just yesterday, the first ever failure of a board of trustees selection to become a university president fell for the first time in decades. Why? Because of, in my view, very extreme political opinions and the ambitions. Yeah, these positions, y'all, and you know this, these positions as presidents of universities and our state colleges have become a jobs program for washed up legislators. These are not people that they're a former Republican state rep and former Republican mayor of Pensacola just the other day. He said he fears that the UWF president becoming the very right-wing Republican education commissioner and former state house member was a done deal. And that if that perception continues, we're not going to get the best people that we need. That's bad enough news for our state universities here in town. But it could be even worse. It would be much, much worse if the same folks are pulling the strings when it comes to our healthcare infrastructure as a community. So I guess I just want to start with, there's been some tension before. Commissioner O'Keefe, you have been a leader in representing our interests as a community in the sort of the push and pull that Commissioner Proctor talked about in terms of the town and gown relationship and who's being a good neighbor to who. As you see these kind of control struggles, how do you see, how is our community still okay after the dope debacle, or are we still divided? How are we feeling about FSU as a general broader Tallahassee community?
You know, first you talk about political appointed, if you will, presidents.
Yes, sir.
And I want to say the appointees we see now are a far cry from what we were worried when the late John Thrasher was appointed president of FSU. And I remember there was a lot of concern because he had not been a college administrator before. And I worked for him. I didn't work for him. I worked for him. And I will say what an incredible example of a leader he was. But that's not the caliber of former politicians that we're getting nowadays. Now, as far as the push and pull with Doak, with Airport Gateway, with hospital, you know, I always like, as an FSU graduate and an FSU fan, I always like to emphasize how much we do work together. City and the county and FSU cannot just go separate and all succeed and improve and do a good job in our community. We just think about the number of employees, programs, and organizations that are part of FSU. We can talk about DOPE, which is a big, big deal. And I got all the time in the world if you want to talk about that. But that's one piece of hundreds or 1,000 other pieces of FSU in this community. And so I want to treat this like we treat a family dispute. If we have a major issue with a family member, it doesn't mean we throw them out. We agree with them on one thing, we don't agree with them on another. But that doesn't mean we just give up and do everything that Uncle FSU wants to do.
Any further remarks?
Yeah, I'll add on to that. I think, as Commissioner O'Keefe said, I went to my first Florida State football game when I was 5 years old. And, the stadium was still in erector set back then. So, I mean, the conversation isn't our community versus Florida State. I mean, really what we're looking at is a few hot-headed men, some at Florida State, some at the city of Tallahassee, in a power struggle to meet their individual goals. And what we're trying to say is we need to be having a broader conversation about community goals, because what we would like to do is work with Florida State to see how we can expand academic medicine in our community. I think that's a laudable goal. I think we should be inviting that type of funding into our community, but it can't come at the expense of our existing hospital and our existing services. So I wouldn't call them our uncle, but we're not fighting the institution. We're just saying, hey, we were set up in a good process where we could all work together collaboratively, where TMH had a seat at the table, where they were working with Florida State, and the city commission and the city of Tallahassee maintained the actual physical assets of the hospital. So any path forward involves all three of those folks working together. It's not shutting anybody out, but it's also not transferring power and ownership away from community control and the people that live here who have owned that hospital longer than I've been alive, and the city who signed a lease that's supposed to go 40 years into the future. So, what we're talking about here is, are we trying to force a hospital to break a long-term commitment that the city already made within a 40-year lease? to push this narrative from Florida State or some other institutions? And are we being transparent about how we're moving forward with it? You know, Florida State, at one point, leadership at Florida State would say, well, they're not actually interested in acquiring the hospital, but if the city wanted to give it to them, they would take it. And I think we all know that that's not true. That's not what was happening. There was a coordinated effort to take control of the hospital. And we can't forget that. That's how this all initially started. Somebody decided they wanted TMH. They wanted it to be transferred under different ownership for their own goals, and they tried to do that without inviting anybody else into the conversation. And we got to say, that's wrong. That's not how you do things. If you want to start that conversation, you can start it community-wide and see if the people of Tallahassee agree with you.
Points well taken. Commissioner Porter, you have any thoughts on how you personally balance, as someone who's very deeply ingrained in the community and sort of both worlds, so to speak, of higher ed and the town and gown, both sides? How do you kind of balance those responsibilities as a policymaker?
Well, I think we have to think about the community at large, and FSU has a certain responsibility, and it's not to the community at large, it's to FSU. And that's appropriate for them. But what's appropriate for the city is to think bigger than that, and that includes FSU. So, that's why I voted against the funding to Doak Campbell Stadium, because I didn't think they needed the money, and I thought that it wasn't providing the return on the investment for all of Tallahassee. And I feel the same way about this conversation. There needs to be the burden of proof for relinquishing this kind of asset or community control needs to be met at such a high standard that it is shown that, it's going to benefit the community as a whole. And unfortunately, we haven't even had that conversation. I mean, this all started because, well, in part because TMH was coming to us with a request to create a different board governance structure to have a regional presence in this area. And the merits of that request have not even been discussed. The merits of any request have not been discussed because of how convoluted and crazy, frankly, this all has been. And so I think that's going to be important. And that's a conversation that I say this a lot, that I was not elected to be an expert, but that I was elected to use my judgment. And I can only speak for myself, but knowing my colleagues, none of us are experts on hospital administration or, healthcare systems. So this is a conversation that I take really seriously. I know we all up here and you take seriously, and that needs to happen in a really deliberate and thoughtful way with experts at the table guiding the decision. Because I think that, and as I said in my opening remarks, how we move forward should be shaped by that as well. I mean, I think that I want to see an academic medical center, a partnership, and that does not entail or require a transfer of ownership. So there are a lot of models that we can entertain, thinking forward to the future. And unfortunately, that's not even the conversation that we're having. And it's not a conversation that any of us are qualified to lead, but it's one that I take seriously at, digging into those details so that I can make an informed decision about how we move forward. But I hope that we're going to have that thoughtful conversation. And unfortunately, we at the city have not.
Commissioner Bill Proctor is one of the most FAMU people of all time, from a baby rattler to a matriculated there to now being a professor there. Obviously, FAMU's relationship is a little different to our community than FSU, but how do you see these issues, commissioners? And then we'll go into open questions.
Well, first of all, I may be the only person on the stage that's a soda water boy at 13 years old, 14, trying to make them $12 selling sodas at FSU game. I'm very grateful that I was able to make that $12 back when Darryl Boudreaux, Bill Peterson, somebody was the coach. There was no expectation about victory, anything like that. Just take the shirt off, get a suntan, and drank real good. Very low key competitiveness. It just didn't exist. I was always glad if Florida A&M had a game, because I could go to Florida State game with a FAMU game and make maybe $10 or something. So if I could get $20 some, man, I was there. I mean, that was great. So I love FSU from the get-go. But it's true, Florida State is a bully. And this money that they want for Spring Hill Road and this new road gateway comes up out of nowhere and just kind of bully the commissioners around. I said that they close down streets, they take stuff. That's who they are. But what troubles me the most as a representative of DEI is that if the ownership shifts, um, that signals that the state policies of anti-DEI, which killed Dr. Santa Ono on yesterday, his was a view too pro-DEI, they said. But if we get Florida State in charge, Florida State eliminated 432 courses in the fall semester 24. They're not playing. They damn sure don't give a damn about DEI. I do. So that philosophy governed by the state, the LAPO, the governor, everybody that's a big is going to run that train. And that train right there is going to exclude black folk, po folk. I don't even know Medicaid. Look, in today's newspaper, Zotira, y'all's paper, it said that 30,000 admissions occurred at TMH last year, and 130,000 emergency room visits were at TMH. FSU Med School ain't got no capacity to handle 30,000 admission. Let's talk about capacity. They don't have capacity to handle 130,000 emergency room visits there. Now, start from capacity of look at the demand of who's coming, what's coming. My district, I need to, shout out because I think I'm unique among county commissioners. I have the number 81 ranked public university, Florida A&M, which is also simultaneously the number one public HBCU, historically black college and university in District 1. I have in my district, Florida State University, which is a top 25 public university. And I don't know any place in the United States that one commissioner has a Power PWI top 20 and the number one HBCU in the same district. I love my schools. I love both of them, and I view them as community assets. But for Florida State to be the title owner of TMH, it shifts their perspective of governance. I'm concerned about black doctors, black nurses, black technicians, black pharmacists, black moppers, cleanup folk, all of that. And Florida State has been such a big old wimp. I mean, spineless, and have just laid straight down like they got no backbone to fight for, to stand up for. When you look at their spiraling numbers of black admissions, pitiful. They're just as sorry as they can be. And I like to see an institution in charge that really caters toward the 14th Amendment with the equal protection of the law, the equal protection and access to medical care. And right now in TMH, you don't have to have, just come to the emergency room. 130,000 people didn't have insurance, trust and believe. Hell of a lot of them didn't have that.
Point's really well taken. And I have heard, incidentally, and if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. We'll get to you. What's that? You got it. Yes, ma'am. I have heard even that Joseph Latifa, the Surgeon General of Florida, who is a vaccine skeptic, to put it generously, and who led a successful crusade that took the fluoride out of the municipal drinking water in all 67 of our counties with one stroke of the pen in the back of the bill in the state legislative session. He was originally floated to be the FAMU president. Imagine what that would be like, y'all. I mean, we can't delude ourselves into thinking that couldn't happen to FSU because it's happening to our entire state university system. So we'll have a question right away. Ma'am, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Suzanne Crayoğlu, and I got my PhD at FSU in international political economy. I actually taught gay politics there, so FSU wasn't totally against DEI back in the day. So I have a billion things to say, but I forgot them because I couldn't really say it in real time. So I'm just going to respond to what you were saying, Commissioner. You had mentioned, let me start here. I've been focused on the federal level, so I'm not really detailed about the FSU purchase of TMH. You know, my parents immigrated here. I'm gay. My dad didn't become a citizen until after I was born. So I've been focused on like, am I going to still be a citizen? Are my parents going to be deported? Like, what are they going to do to me because I'm gay? I was already kicked out of the military because I'm gay when I decided to serve after 9/11 and became the first female rescue swimmer in the 7th Fleet. They still thought it appropriate to kick me out. So anyway, so I get it. So I haven't been focused on this. But what I noticed you saying was that FSU is a bully, right? And then a few sentences later, you call them weak and they just laid down. So I'm like, okay, which one is it? And so then I thought, well, are we really placing the blame correctly on FSU? And this, and I didn't understand the connection to DEI and TMH, but now I kind of do, because the governor is pushing get rid of DEI. I mean, this is coming from the administration at the top. So FSU is getting a lot more pressure than just our governor. I mean, they're like, dang, look what happened to Harvard. We can't fight that. We're just going to like lay down because that's what people do when they don't feel like they have any other choice. They're going to postpone and see if we can just wait it out. Okay, so I don't know if we should demonize FSU for that, but I don't know why they're buying TMH. I don't know those details. But, you know, if there's anything, maybe it's more like, let's talk to them and figure out what pressure they're under, and maybe we can support them so we can all work together and prevent this whole thing from happening.
If I might, yeah, great point. And I think that there's an emerging consensus, if I might preempt, there's an emerging consensus, I think, for a model of partnership, not ownership, right? I think that's really important. And I think none other than Bob Lotin once said on this stage, without the universities, we're Lake City, right? So we're very grateful to our higher education. We love them. It's all about how we manage this thing, right? Like, of course, it's not about demonizing FSU at all, to I think anybody, but to just making sure that ordinately to our own proportion, we're taking the right amount of control and guiding it suchly. But I know
Well, Dr. Crowell, I appreciate you pointing at the statement I made out that FSU is a bully and weak. You recognize, as I do, that the bully is a bully, shows strength, but a bully is also weak in that the bully does not accommodate difference. The bully does not like those of that which is within their taste. And so there's a weakness when you're unable to sit next to that man and that woman right there in this room. There's a weakness when that man and woman don't sit together and you can't accommodate someone because they're gay. You can be a bully, but be very weak because of your inability to accommodate that which is different. That's what I mean.
Yeah, I totally understand that.
Yes, you bet. Yes.
Commissioner Porter or Commissioner Mallett, you recognize?
I wanted to follow you. You said something is FSU buying TMH, and I wanted us all to take a step back right now, because as a city commission, we have never declared TMH is for sale to anybody at the elected level. The ownership of the city, it would be similar to you have a nice car in your driveway, and Florida State's like, oh, I really want to buy that. That's where we're at right now. You know, they have no legal authority to take the hospital from us. TMH doesn't have the authority to go enter into an agreement with Florida State to take the hospital from us. It belongs to the people of Tallahassee, and it has to flow through elected city leadership for any type of change to go on. And I think it's curious. People said, is Florida State interested in buying the hospital? You know, the hospital's assets, I think, are valued at close to $1 billion. But my understanding from conversations behind the scenes, there may have been an intent for Florida State to offer money to buy it. But I think what's happening now, and I think we'll see this through agenda material that our city management, who's been orchestrating this behind closed doors, has put forward, it seems like they're more intent on giving the hospital to Florida State, transferring your $1 billion asset to state government with nothing that benefits the public. And I think when we look at that process, I think we are bound by the state laws and the state statutes that let us enter into an agreement with TMH to begin with. So even if we were to default on their lease and intend to give it to somebody else, there's fairly defined processes that we need. And one of those is making sure it's in the best interest of the public and the people in our community. And another is making sure it goes through a very transparent and public process and public hearing process for the people who actually own the hospital to weigh in. But I mean, when I first heard that maybe they just want to give the hospital to the state, I was flabbergasted. How could that be in anybody's interest to just give away the hospital that served us so well for so long? But when you look at situations like $20 million of your economic development money to Doug Campbell Stadium, sometimes logic isn't what they're after. Right? It's if they can grab it and they think they can get the political capital to do it, they'll just take it. And I think it's up to all of us to let our elected officials know what's right and what's wrong, what we believe is right and what's wrong. And you mentioned state control of it. Currently, the board of directors of the hospital get nominated, and we as a city commission approve them. I think if we transfer this asset to the state, when people get nominated, you might see something like a Matt Gaetz tweet say, "No, don't let that person on the board. They're too good. Appoint this person." You might see a Donald Trump tweet that says, "No, they shouldn't be on the board of your hospital." And what we've seen an effect in our university system is that has an effect on who's in control. And I think that's the biggest question: is do we want to make sure, as local elected officials, we're way less engaged in partisan politics. We're much more engaged in the nuts and bolts of protecting our community. The farther we go up the ladder, the state government or federal government having decision-making in our local community, the worse results we're going to get. I think that needs to be clear.
Points really well taken. We've got another question here, but first I'd like to remind people that our hospital has been owned by the people of Tallahassee since 1946, y'all. This arrangement has served our community pretty well for a long time, and I think that we've just got to be really careful before making any rash decisions, because as has been noted, if we make this decision right now in the fog of war, we'll never have another meeting like this. We'll never have we'll have no bargaining chips. If we do this irrevocably, we are without a voice in the governance of our hospital. I think that is worth noting. We've got a question here.
Thank you, Ryan. I've got a triple bagger for y'all. First, this business cone silence that's been talked about already, everyone from TMH to FSU to whoever being afraid to speak up with it. Do you think they're even, in light of the crap that happened the last time, a couple of months ago, this came up with the public, do you think people are going to try again to do another, quote, deal, and everyone's going to try and ram that through? Talk about that however you want. Second thing is, the Democrat had the good article online, and then presumably it's going to be in their hard copy soon enough. The partnership that was talked about with Tampa General and the University of South Florida as a possible model for us to utilize. That looked good on paper. What do y'all think about that? And lastly, Mr. Proctor brought up the whole Medicaid situation. One, and you may not know, because this is too early, and I know we're all opposing the Medicaid cuts, but if the Medicaid cuts were to go through, how much of a dent would that put at TMH? If anyone has any idea of that, that would be fine. Anyway, I know that's a lot all the way around, but I'm just tossing it to let y'all talk about any and all of that.
Thank you, John. Your questions hit well with what Dr. Veteran brought up. The issue with the conversation that's being had, and the reason we're having to have meetings like this, is because a decision is going too fast. We're talking about decades of an arrangement for our community hospital, and if it were up to me, which it's not, I'm a county commissioner, right? And the lease is with the city commission, we would have at least a year of citizen input and meetings. We have meetings and committees that last a year for how we're going to rename streets. And we're talking about changing our entire hospital ownership. And that is what leads to people feeling like we're demonizing one part or the other and confusing the different parties. Because remember, your city commission is to represent you. FSU is to represent you, your students, and the board of governors up to the state. TMH is to represent TMH in the hospital. So these are the type of things that we would really suss out in a long-term community conversation. And as far as the details with John, I couldn't tell you what Medicaid cuts would do to TMH, but I can tell you that as I've watched news of Medicaid cuts, my late parents relied on Medicaid for their long-term institutional care. And I have had these difficult thoughts reading, thank God I don't have to worry that we're going to have to figure out if they get kicked out on the street from their nursing facility because of Medicaid cuts. That's stuff that happens, and that's stuff that goes for the hospital too.
Can I make a point? I used to work at NACA, which
Any
is
further?
the state Medicaid agency.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I got you.
I worked for the Agency for Healthcare Administration for 7.5 years, which is the state Medicaid agency. Here, let me hold on a second. And so I worked in health information technology, so not necessarily Medicaid, but of course we've been paying attention to the federal budget. That's going to be passed because, of course, the federal government matches 50 cents to each dollar that we spend, and then they also do enhanced funding for Medicaid systems if you get them certified by CMS. And that was one of the things we were concerned about because they were going to get rid of that, which means that Medicaid is not going to invest in systems, which means providers and beneficiaries are going to have a harder time to get their benefits. And then if they completely get rid of it, I mean, of course, the state is going to have to fit the bill, and maybe then they'll cut funding. You know what I mean? And so then what? We're going to cut services. Maybe we put tighter rules over our health plans. So I mean, there will be some impact.
So certainly, putting our healthcare into a system that we know is contracting, obviously, is going to have adverse outcomes, and I don't think that it's prudent. I don't think that most people would advise it. We've got one more question here.
The one thing I want to say is I used to work for Department of Health for 23 years. You don't want Delapo, or whatever his name is, anywhere near TMH. It's horrible. The one thing that comes to mind is if this were to be given to FSU, it's kind of like an expropriation of something that we paid for, and that cannot happen. That's ridiculous. The community paid for it, and we can't give it away. We need the money. I mean, Tallahassee needs the money. If not to pay for indigent health care, if Medicaid is cut. The other thing that really scares me, and it's in line with Bill Proctor, what he was talking about, is the fact that the quality of the medical staff could suffer. I mean, people should be hired, doctors should be hired based upon their skills, their preparation, their skills, their past history, and not anything. It shouldn't have anything to do with their identity, whether they're, black or white or Hispanic or gay or straight or whatever. It has nothing to do with quality of care.
I would add, I know that throughout the course of this process, the uncertainty that this has introduced into the process has led 3 doctors at TMH apply for jobs outside of Tallahassee, y'all. We saw this with firefighters, where we lost good firefighters because of the intransigence of local government politics, and we can't have this with our doctors as well. So, do you have any thoughts towards that?
Yeah, well, I wanted to touch on both of your comments on indigent care. When you have a community-based hospital like TMH, those types of priorities are community priorities, taking care of the people that live here. When you have a research institution that's driven by research dollars flowing down through the government, they have a different set of priorities. So we look at TMH. Currently, they supply something like $80 million annually in indigent care. Where would that go under a different model? We don't really know. And then to your second point, if we do sell the hospital, if it were for sale for hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion, where should that money go? And I think our state statutes, as I read them, speak pretty plainly that money should be put into a fund to supply for indigent care specifically. So if we are going to transfer the hospital, if the majority of our city leadership decides that's the direction we're going to go, we need to make sure we're getting a fair market value for it, and we're putting that money to where it's going to help the people that need help the most. Because right now it seems like nobody's worried about the people that need help the most in our community. Nobody's having a conversation about what's going to happen when somebody breaks their leg or God forbid gets cancer in our community, and they can't afford to pay for it. Isn't that what the conversation we should be having? If that's not front and center, how we're going to make sure people have access to quality medicine, we're just in an ego battle for people's personal, political, or financial gain, and that's not the way we should go.
We're gonna move. Thank you for that. We're gonna move it around the room a little bit. But first, we've got Bobby Bucciolato, who had a comment.
Thank you. I'll be brief, and I'll drop stuff. Doctors at TMH saved both of my sons' lives. They were born premature, and they were in the NICU. My second son, Noah, was in intensive care and had to go into a medically induced coma. And we got to know the doctors very well there, and then eventually at Shands as well. I cannot stress enough what a catastrophe long term it would have on this community. A community that we are not a poor community. But if you notice up there on that stage, a majority of our representatives are not on that stage. A majority of our representatives act as though we are a poor community. And they spend our money in a very poor fashion. And the fact that we have a hospital that cares for people, that is affordable, that is accessible, and that is a good and decent instrument for good in this community saves lives. And the fact that they would gamble that, and they would do it in the shadows. They wouldn't even have the guts to do it to your faces. That says a lot about the best and the worst of who is representing you. Thank you.
Well, what I've been trying to be clear about, to me, like Ukraine had a pretty good week. I understand this week. Russia. We got Russia in the middle of Tallahassee. And every day I go to my office, I look out and I try to see if the Confederate flag is at the top of the state capitol. And I think this issue is, to me, our effort to push back on Florida State flying the Confederate flag on top of Ruby Diamond Auditorium. And when you're so hard into anti-DEI, I don't see the American flag. I see the Confederate flag. And what we're trying to do in Tallahassee, that we're fighting. I mean, that symbol hopefully is clear enough for everybody. We're trying to keep that flag off of as many units of, we thought, with publicly owned spaces. We don't want the Confederate flag over TMH, because Black folk ain't gonna want to go there. It was hard enough when the FAMU hospital was closed down. As Ryan pointed out, 46 TMH open, but nobody Black could go to it. My grandmother had to go to Archibald up in Thomasville to have Operation 50s. It was not open. And I know it's hard for y'all because everything has always been open, maybe. But for a hell of a lot of people that I represent, and you represent too, that flag and who's flying on top of that building matters. And it took a long time before Black folk walked through the doors of TMH because of just nowhere else to go. We don't want that spirit to pervade this community. We don't want that idea to take over the hospital and its care, its access, its openness, who can come, is you insured, is you ain't insured, that's the part that we're fighting. Open access and the symbolism of the state of Florida is dangerous. It pervades and portends a dangerous mindset that we don't want to go back to.
Yeah. Well said, Commissioner Proctor. We've got a question in the back from a former Florida State professor.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. First of all, is there anybody on either commission that made the decision to put TMH up for sale?
So technically, the hospital is not for sale, as far as I know. Part of the problem with this process is that a lot of it has been happening behind the scenes without commissioners or the public's awareness, but that has not come to us for a vote to initiate a sale, though it does seem that those conversations have been happening in behind the scenes between the city manager and the mayor and FSU.
Okay, so you said the mayor. Okay, second question. Since 1946, have you had your lease since 1946? Okay, and okay, so since why would we have a situation like Bill Proctor's if you've had a lease since 1946? Was there anything in that lease that protected no matter what race you were?
Not, you might be able to speak. I mean, the lease has been amended several times since then. So the lease we have today is not the lease we had.
Well, and with that lease back then, the segregated era, that was before Brown. Brown comes up 8 years later.
Sure.
But you had the 64 Civil Rights Act. You got 42 USC 1983 that for entities that receive federal funds, they cannot discriminate. So it's federal law that opens the doors. It's the federal law. It's an American flag pointing to a state or entity operating on the mentality of a Confederate flag and border across the South. But the federal government saying, if you receive federal funds, back then I think it was called Health, Education, and Welfare, HEW, threatened to withdraw the funds from Tallahassee Memorial because they were not integrated or desegregated.
I came to FSU in 1978. FSU was a different place. Okay, during my time being there, I felt that they absolutely ran over Bobby Bowden. Okay, you wouldn't have that. Some people call it a jock palace. You wouldn't have that if it hadn't been for him. And then they kind of pushed him out, and then they tried to pull him back in. Okay, and then when they took the $20 million from Blueprint, they also had an overrun. They also said they came in under budget of $20 million. Why didn't they give it back? Why didn't you have something in your Blueprint agreement that said, if you find out that you're under budget, that money comes back to us?
These are the questions that I wish I was on the commission at the time to ask and that citizens were asking. I do actually want to acknowledge the work to desegregate TMH. What we actually just, the city, renamed the street representing our own local citizen, Reverend R.N. Gooden, who played a huge part in desegregating TMH. And so to your point, our community and members of our most marginalized communities have done incredible work to get where we are, and we still have more to go. And turning this over to the state threatens pushing all of that work back like it never happened.
Got a question. Got a few questions here. Bill Davis.
Hi. I've noticed in the last probably 10 or 15 years, seems like a lot of really good government assets like NASA or local level schools, public utilities have been increasingly privatized for the benefit of capital. I've noticed that the board of trustees at our university, many of them are made up of venture capitalists or entities that are connected with them, lobbyists for venture capitalists. And then I'm also concerned about partnerships with venture capitalists where universities sometimes kind of privatize. They put the university name and you actually don't realize you're going to a for-profit medical operation. in any of these discussions, has city staff talked about an agreement, if this agreement, any kind of agreement goes through that would prevent our hospital from ever becoming privatized or becoming a for-profit in some disguise or otherwise?
No, I don't believe so. And I think that's an important a point to make, and why it's so critical and crucial to keep the actual hospital under city ownership. We don't run the hospital as a city. TMH is a nonprofit that we've chosen and trusted to run the hospital's day-to-day operation. So we have no liability for what happens there, but we do have that ultimate control of protecting it from private acquisition, for protecting our hospital from bad actors. It was mentioned earlier, and to your point, shouldn't we know if those conversations are taking place, if those questions are being asked? We don't know because none of the negotiations that are happening are being done transparently at publicly noticed meetings for us to attend. What is happening is the mayor and the city manager are circumventing good government practices and trying to come up with a deal that they tie up with a bow to bring to our city commission to try to get 3 votes. We've had a city manager go as far to use leverage saying he has 3 votes and he's going to get what he wants. We've had that, represented across our community, not just on this issue, but other issues. And I think that's the underlying problem that we're facing. For years, we've had a government that doesn't operate in a transparent fashion. I think if you bring people to the table, you let them be a part of the conversation, you'll probably get better outcomes. And some of the people having behind closed doors conversations would probably get what they wanted if it was actually in the public interest. But we're not doing things that way right now. So to your point, if this moves forward 10 years from now, 20 years from now, private equity, private ownership, whoever wants to profit off of the sick and the dying may take our hospital. We just don't know.
Any further stuff?
And what makes that very much, what makes Florida State's ownership more vulnerable to equity buy-in interest is the cutting back of NIH dollars, the cutting back of HHS dollars, the freezing. I mean, you've heard of Harvard University before. And if government monies are not there, then private is going to have to fill in the gap. So the public dollar is not marching forward in areas of medical service and relief. Take Florida's legislature, speaking of the old Confederate flag. We have a legislature which for over a decade has refused to expand Medicaid, where the cost of expansion is like the first year or so, pennies on the dollar. And by the time you top off, the state would pay no more, if I remember the formula right, maybe 10% and then the feds would pay the rest. But we're so cone-headed and in a different orientation that we refuse to accept the best of. It's weird. And this is not a time to start a new medical. FSU has not the capacity to meet the demands at TMH now, number one. Number two, they have not identified funding sources for the scale at which running a hospital costs. And then number three, they would be susceptible to state policies and rules which are anti-DEI. And again, as long as I live and represent the district that I do, I would have to oppose and would hope to always see the city's flag and the American flag flying on top of TMH.
We've got, we're going to take just a couple more questions, folks, as we begin to wrap up. Really want to be respectful of our panelists' time. We really, really appreciate y'all. We've got one more from Nolan, one of our party members here in the back.
Hi, my name is Nolan Wilson. All the commissioners, especially Mr. Proctor, spoke a lot about how important it was to protect the city's infrastructure from political interference. However, one question that is at the top of my mind right now is, we're looking back about 60 years ago at the Civil Rights Act, but we're at this crucial moment now determining the ownership of the city's hospital. Where do you see healthcare in the city going like 20, 30 years forward? You know, what is there? What would be your idea of how city hospital should be managed and what the ideal state of the city's healthcare infrastructure looks like?
Any thoughts from the panel in that direction? I mean, one, the entire thing has been thrown into chaos so intensely. I know Commissioner O'Keefe has talked about medical debt, and there's been other interventions that folks can take. Commissioner Porter and then Commissioner O'Keefe.
I'll pass it off, but I'll just say I support Medicare for all.
Hey. I support Medicare for all. And I just to follow up on your point, I mean, when we look at healthcare on a 20-year horizon, that's where we got to go if we're going to make sure people in one of the wealthiest countries in the history of our planet takes care of its people, right? We know that is a proven method to do that. Locally, what does that mean? When you have a community hospital like TMH, it means we continue to control the priorities of that local institution. We can focus on things like individual health disparities in different neighborhoods or Black infant mortality rates or all these things that aren't national particularly, but affect our community differently. You know, health concerns aren't the same from community to community. And I think that's what makes a hospital like TMH under community control so special, because you have a board that's not there to drive up their profit margins. They're not there to try to sell the hospital to the next bidder so they can get a bigger yacht the next week. You know, our board members are volunteers. They do it because they care about our community. They live here, they're from here, and they care about Tallahassee, and they care about the people here. And I think that's what we stand to lose. But long term, that's the solution for 20 years.
I'm so glad you brought this up. And Ryan, I'd like to extend this to 9 p.m. so that I could go more. So here's the thing. To be clear, not that it was on the table, but I also support and volunteered to campaign for before I ever got into office Medicare for all. So we have been with TMH, with HCA, and FSU, a ton of partners, and FAMU have been working to expand access to healthcare, which we have to do much more to expand over the next 5, 10, 20 years. That's why I jumped in on participating with this community health needs assessment that TMH does, because it brought together stakeholders from every aspect of the community. And so we're not talking about only talking to nurses and doctors and people who take blood pressure. We're talking about talking to mental health counselors, housing advocates, secure food security advocates, and finding out from people who are not in charge of organizations, but who are the service providers or the clients or the participants or the people who can't get doctors, nurses, psychologists, counselors. And those things are things that the county, the city, and particularly TMH, through their community health plans, are expanding. We have a lot to do. And so I want to be clear, we are not where we need to be. This is one of the number one issues for me. A couple of things that came up from that CHNA, which I believe the report is coming out or has been out or should be out soon, is barriers to getting professionals to work here, affordable housing, affordable care for their children. Those are the things that are preventing. This is what I heard from the CEO of HCA when I met with him, that housing is keeping him from attracting doctors and nurses. These are the things we need to fix to expand access to healthcare. And I'll put a note on this. Skilled nursing facilities. We have a 290,000 population for this county. I want to hear a guess of how many individual skilled nursing beds are available in this county. Shout it out. Less than 1,000. 900 something, less than 1,000. And 180 of those are at TMH's facility. So we have a lot to do to expand healthcare, and throwing a wrench in what we've been working on is not going to do it.
Points very well taken. Points very well taken. We've got a question back from Yen Bailey, who's one of our party members who is running for Congress.
Hi, so I've been hearing all this talk about these backroom conversations. My question is, is there something that defines the legal process, like the proper procedure that needs to be followed for a transaction like this to take place? Is it being followed? And if it's not, what can be done about that?
Sure. So when I read the state statutes, I think there is a very defined process for how this should go. And I think that has them putting all of their cards on the table and declaring their intentions with a publicly noticed public hearing process. So everybody in our community has the right to know exactly what the deal will look like, what it would be, and be able to address their elected officials in a public meeting 3 minutes at a time. And the feedback that I've gotten, there's likely thousands of people that have an opinion that want to come out and let their elected officials know exactly how they feel. And that is the process as it's defined as I read it in state statutes. And also that's the process for good governance in general. When you have important decisions, the public has the right. And when we look at sunshine laws, I mean, the state of Florida has a long history and tradition of making sure every part of the decision-making process is available to the public, is available for inspection. And, those laws are put into place to combat the idea that, backroom deals are being struck or, any resemblance or semblance of wrongdoing, you want to cast that out. But what we have seen and what we know is happening, the mayor and the city manager are acting as if they are the decision makers when they are not. They have no authority to do any of that behind the deals. They're banking on being able to strike a deal without bringing it to the city commission first. And that's wrong and it's bad governance. That's not what a council management form of government is supposed to look like. But our local government has gone so far off the rails. Like, the train can't even see the tracks, how we're operating someday. So to bring it back in, that should be what it looks like. And it continues to be interesting to me because we hear like there's no interest. Florida State's not interested in buying the hospital. But if out of the blue the city decides to sell it, they would be interested. Well, we're the decision makers. The city commission are. If we want to have that conversation, bring an item to the city commission to discuss if we even want to contemplate a sale. That's what good governance looks like. Decision making should start at the top. It should never be circumvented. And I think that's why this process, not only were we blindsided as city commissioners, hospital leadership was blindsided. Everybody was blindsided besides the people who were trying to cook something up to make happen. So, I think it's a case lesson. And I think, the email I sent to President McCullough is like, this isn't good for Florida State. This isn't a good way for Florida State to be represented to the public. We don't want the people in our community to hate our university, but we keep getting forced into these positions. Doug Campbell Stadium was one of them, and this is another one. We're not enemies. We're not at battle with Florida State University, but just a few people can keep making decisions without the buy-in from the community first. That puts us into that position, and it doesn't feel right. We don't want to hate them. They don't want to hate us. Nobody hates each other, but we got to get away from decision making in that way.
I believe also we're going to have a few more questions here. Just a point of information. I believe that a supermajority of the FSU Board of Trustees board lives outside of Leon County, and nearly all of them were appointed by Governor Ron DeSantis. Another question here from a new party member.
And we thank them for their tourism taxes when they visit.
Absolutely. Paying into that TDT. Good question here from Steve Suarez.
Thank you. First of all, thank you all for being here. I appreciate your time. My name is Steve. I'm a paramedic. I've worked my entire adult life here in the community, last 20 years. I pretty much agree with a lot of what's being said, particularly the concerns about DEI and state government influence, potentially at the hospital and organization. I guess I almost kind of want to offer a suggestion and some thoughts on the approach that's being taken, not just by the city, but by those of us in this room, those of you on the stage, and the approach you're taking on, how are we asking the right questions? Are the questions being asked truly about healthcare? There are questions that have come up about, the quality of healthcare being delivered in the community right now. And would we better serve would we be better served by steering that conversation back towards healthcare, back towards are there benefits to a partnership, not necessarily transfer in ownership, but maybe a partnership, and are there things that can be leveraged there to improve the healthcare? Because of what I'm hearing, and I understand there's a lot there, but I work for, at EMS, I worked for county government for almost 20 years. Now I do work for the hospital. But, what I saw was an informational item come to the city commission. It wasn't a, hey, we're going to sell and let's have a vote. It was an informational item. And what I've heard since then is, look at all these backroom deals and all these things being done. But no one has steered the conversation back towards, are there any benefits that we would have as a community from helping realize a partnership with FSU? Because, yeah, there is, TMH does give $80 million in uncompensated care, but the University of Florida gives $260 million in uncompensated care every year. And if you had a complex medical problem, as proud as I am to work at TMH and the doctors at TMH, if you had a complex medical problem that needed specialty care, one of my ambulances is going to ship you to the University of Florida to receive that care. It's not going to be here. So how do we leverage the opportunity that we have now when we're having this discussion to build a partnership? I understand the dynamics of the mayor and the city manager and all those things, but the fact is, guys, you're on a 2-3 split. You're on the 2 side, and this approach that we're taking year after year about sitting here and having these conversations about, hey, let's point at them. Is this a backroom deal? It doesn't look to me like that's working right now. So how do we steer that conversation to healthcare, to the people that are at the table, to what are the benefits? And yeah, maybe if there is a benefit, we do it. Maybe if there's not a benefit, the commission as a whole considers it. I just don't know that this discussion about, the fact is that these conversations about DEI and, the administration, the way you change that is by changing the administration. And right now, we're not winning those elections. So we got to figure out what is the approach that we have to take so we can win some of those elections and to have the conversations about what we should be standing for, which is the healthcare in the community.
Sure.
Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with you. And kind of what you described is where we were heading before this wrench was thrown in the process. Florida State and TMH have had a great relationship. They're working on a facility in Panama City. We're building an academic medical center right here in Tallahassee. And I agree, the best approach is a collaborative approach where TMH maintains the structure it has in coordination with city government. And we support Florida State in its pursuit of academic medicine. And that's kind of what we stand to lose from this approach is we have the best of all worlds right now. Everybody was working collaboratively together. So your question, and I understand it, and I understand the frustration because for 7 years I've banged my head against the wall when some of these things happen. So it's not lost on me what you're saying, but I think it's important for the public to know what is happening because that relationship existed before this popped out of nowhere. That relationship to build that type of partnership that would benefit everybody because can there be improvements at TMH? Yes, absolutely. But we want to be part of that conversation. We don't want to hand it all over to one entity. So I think what's been concerning to us is nobody knew about it. Nobody, do we just stay silent and this comes up for an agenda item and people find out a week later that they just lost their hospital. They don't know what's happening. And so I think there is the need to highlight how things are being done and played out. But to your point, we should elevate that conversation more of what a joint partnership can look like and focus on those benefits. I do agree with you there.
As we all know, we've seen time and time again, just because it passes on a 3-2, don't make it right. And I think the public conversation that hasn't been happening is exactly what we're here tonight. We're going to have a few more questions from folks.
Good evening. My name is Paul Ahrens. I'm a physician retired from the Florida Department of Health, so I haven't been delivering patient care in this community. I've been a patient at TMH a couple of times and been very satisfied with the quality of care. And I agree that there are situations that go to the next level where people go to Mayo or they go to Shands, as you mentioned earlier. And I kind of like the direction that the conversation has taken in terms of collaboration and in terms of an integrated system of healthcare. My question is, because this is such a complex issue, if the conversation proceeded ideally as you're describing it, Mr. Mantle, should this be an issue on the ballot rather than being decided by the representative commissions? And if so, is there a mechanism for that taking place?
Yeah, I believe there's always a mechanism to ask the people on such an important issue what they think. You know, when we did the children's services tax, we asked the people if they wanted to implement that. When you have $1 billion asset, is it something that can be placed on the ballot for support or not? I believe so, and you know, I think I probably support. Further thoughts?
We put the blueprint sales tax before the people. We put the children services tax on the ballot for the people. There's no reason, certainly we ought to put this if it comes to that. Since we're talking about teaching, my doctor called recently to say that when they were a pharmacy student at Florida A&M back in the day, that they could not go to Tallahassee Memorial to intern, and that students at FAMU and nursing, this is history, had to go outside of the city of Tallahassee. They did not have access. I'm not satisfied because FAMU is not at the table. If it's going to be a teaching hospital, well, 60% of all Black pharmacists in the United States come from Florida A&M University, period. If we're talking about teaching, how does FAMU segue into the formula of nursing, allied health, pharmacy? How do they integrate? If you're not at the table, it's just too much silence. So that cone of silence bars, and it does not have, and I love both institutions. I'm a graduate of FAMU High School, 1st through 12th grade. I know the, but, and I've taught there for 39 years. So I've got about 51 years combined at FAMU. There's old, long as Dr. Foster and Coach Gates and all those folks. So this question of the public and what is the correct format, there has to be public input as what we're hearing tonight. And Florida State was just plainly wrong. It should have come to the city and said, we have this idea, and we're coming with our partner, TMH. Would you consider this right here? Kind of like going to a man and asking him about his daughter and not running down to tier 1. And then coming back and saying, oh, by the way, we married. That's what they're going to do. They want to come back and say, oh, by the way, we got married.
I think that's a point well taken. I think that consent is key here about something that's so important. And I will say, and we get a few questions, I want to say something. Other communities go to a referendum on way smaller things than this all the time. You know, other counties in central Florida around the state, if they want to issue $40 million in bonds for new school construction, it's common for that to go to a referendum. I'm not speaking for anybody else, but I believe this issue, if it were to move forward, should be subject to a public referendum so that every voice and every vote in Tallahassee can be counted. Shirley's on one of our members.
Really quickly, just to answer your question, there's no legal requirement, as far as we know, that it needs to. Whereas raising taxes, the Children's Services Council, there was a legal requirement.
I really think we have heard a tremendous amount of wisdom from all 4 of you and from the audience on so many aspects of this that are critical, particularly all of the history leading up to it, some ideas about the current background situation. But I'd like to think about the future from today forward. And I'm no legal expert, so I'm not sure what's possible. But I'm terribly worried that all of a sudden, this is going to result, I don't know exactly when, and I'd like you all to tell us the soonest, worst case scenario, if this could come before the city commission and 3 individual citizens, elected people, could decide the sale of the hospital. I don't know if that actually can happen or when it could happen, but I say that's the bottom line. We can theorize and philosophize and think about all the wonderful things that could happen. And they could happen if that stopped, and we have future years to expand on already having wonderful collaboration, as it's been explained, between FSU and the hospital on research and residencies, etc. So I would just like to know today, what can be done to prevent what I see would be a terrible outcome if 3 people would decide to sell the hospital?
As far as the process, there is not agreement right now as far as whether the state statute that Commissioner Matlow mentioned applies in this situation. That is still being worked out.
Statute is.
And I don't know the statute off the top of my head. 15540. And I want to give quickly, because I know we're at time as well. So when the first request was made by TMH for a change in their board governance structure, when requests are made by TMH of that kind, according to our lease agreement, they're automatically accepted within 60 days unless the city commission rules otherwise. So there was a time constraint about that specific request unrelated to a sale that was associated with their request. They withdrew that request. So there is no longer the 60-day limit to make any kind of decision. I have not been updated as far as the status of negotiations or meetings between FSU and the city, among FSU, TMH, and the city. It's not on our upcoming agenda, which is at the meeting next Wednesday. But I think that emailing your city commissioners, showing up to the city commission meeting, asking for these kinds of clarifying questions that we are also asking about the process, continuing to apply that pressure to ask for a fair and open process that's thorough. It's something that citizens can initiate to be put on the ballot. We could enshrine, if we wanted to, a protection for, I don't see why not, that this be part of our charter. There are other avenues that we could explore that we haven't. But so I do not have a timeline at all. We're about to go on a break for 2 months. Our next meeting, I think, is in August. And so unless there's a special meeting to have a vote on this, things would be really different if there was agreement about the statute and whether it applied, then we would have a much clearer understanding. But the city has not said yet that they will follow that process and that they believe it applies to them.
I would just say, we have our ear to the ground. If we hear that anything's moving, if we sense that anything's moving, we're going to let the public know right away so they can weigh in. I think to be preemptive, if it were me, I'd have questions for my elected officials. My questions are you interested in selling our hospital? If you are going to sell our hospital, are you going to follow state statutes and make sure we have public hearings and have an ability to weigh in? And are you interested in just giving the hospital to an entity like Florida State? Are you going to demand fair market value? Because, that's fiscally prudent, right? We need to know where people stand on those 3 core issues. Because if this does move forward and, with the intent to give our hospital away, I think it's going to be disastrous for our community. I think people across our community are going to be outraged. If you thought people were outraged about the Campbell Stadium, why did you give away $1 billion hospital? So I think, just letting people know how you feel or where you stand. If you support an academic medical center with Florida State in partnership, let them know you're not against a collaborative effort, but maintaining local control. That's something you support. And if you support giving it to them, let them know that too. I'm not here to direct how you feel or what your opinion is. Certainly I have a strong opinion of my own, but I think, early and often letting your elected officials know where you stand is helpful.
Well, let me augment what Commissioner Matlow said. I don't understand if you have a Florida State Tallahassee Memorial Hospital, why you can't have a Florida State FAMU Tallahassee Memorial Hospital. We got a FAMU Florida State Engineering School, and well, it includes inclusivity of that name FAMU gives comfort, even if there's nothing crafted with that the partnership for the two schools in my district, then all academia is well served out of the central location of TMH. So if we're going to do that, Commissioner, I'm telling y'all right now, nothing short of a Florida State FAMU TMH partnership.
There you go.
Wouldn't it be nice too if we saw a process where we got to answer Steve's question? Get all the stakeholders involved, and that's not just us, the people party to the agreement. That's care providers, that's advocates for people with all kinds of symptoms who are all kinds of clients for healthcare, and spend a year finding out what is the best outcome from the medical and the patient community for the best health, and let that guide the decision of what happens in our community hospital. Wouldn't that be nice?
Absolutely. I think there's an important context here that I would just like to put out before we recognize our next questioner. In terms of local control and the consolidation of people, the consolidation of the powerful, the folks who have the most power incumbently right now, if they see that they can do this, I'm telling y'all, they will take our electric utility from us. This is important concept. If they see that the people are animated and activated around this issue, I think we stand a fighting chance of controlling our future. But I think if not, if they see a stop spot here, why would they stop? They don't stop in Gainesville. They didn't stop with these other colleges are taking them. So anyway, next question.
I'll keep this quick for the sake of time. So you've spoken before about like legislative avenues to address this. I feel like there's also other avenues we taken as well. Social media, we could be raising the alarm and kind of getting people from other cities involved as well, so they can kind of weigh in on the problems they've dealt with for things that have happened like this. So I guess I'm asking, what could be a call for action that you might envision that goes beyond legislative maneuvering for?
As we begin to wrap up, I think probably make that the last question.
Okay, sure, yeah. And my call to action would be simple. I would think, look at a sale of TMH facility and ask, who would a sale benefit? And if the answer isn't you and your family, TMH just isn't for sale, period. And I think, that is the rallying cry. It's ours. It's not for sale. We want it. We want to keep it. We want our local hospital. That was the message that was going on across social media. And frankly, I think that's the message I've seen. People say that this has been a divisive issue, and nothing could be farther from the truth. My last political election, they spent $500,000 to try to unseat me. On the TMH issue, me and my opponents agree that all of our political opponents agree this should stay and local ownership, because at the end of the day, what's good for the people in our community should be driven by the people in our community. They understand that as well as we understand that. And as soon as we give it away to people from out of state, and these people aren't going to be here 10 years from now, we'll still be here raising our kids. We'll still be going to Florida State football games, but so many people involved in these things will be on to the next city or the next money-making idea.
I want to be respectful of our panelists' time. It's going to be our very last.
One thing.
By all means, yes, Commissioner.
I would feel much better. I don't understand. Do the president of Florida State get a real estate commission of $500,000? And if the president of Florida State can declare that he's not going to be compensated for the acquisition of TMH, I can feel a lot better. But right now, it seems that the table secret meetings is incentivized with a real estate commission. And I need to know who all else is getting a commission off of this deal.
Okay, I like that.
Good.
Thank you. I have a question, and that is whether any party, has contracted with an independent consulting firm, preferably from out of state, to actually analyze this issue and analyze what would happen under different scenarios.
Anybody besides Reese Bowles didn't.
Not that I'm aware of.
And it would have to be a healthcare consulting firm.
Yeah, getting real expert-driven opinions as opposed to political power plays, I think would be great. Go ahead. Oh.
I just wanted to read one statement, and it is from the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario that saw a 50% increase in registered U.S. trained doctors the first quarter of 2025. Also, the health leaders media states that the number of U.S. doctors taking the first step toward Canadian licensure has increased by 750%. So the chaos we're experiencing here is going to impact our access to good quality care.
No doubt about it, y'all. Well, if you have if there are further questions, we'll research and get back to you. Can we have a round of applause for our panelists? County Commissioner Bill Proctor, City Commissioner Jack Porter, City Commissioner Jeremy Matlow, and County Commissioner David O'Keefe. Thank you all so much. This is the most extensive issue. This is the most extensive conversation that has ever been held in Tallahassee about this. We've been doing this together. Hopefully, this will reverberate out. And I guess I would ask our panelists if they have any final remarks.
Well, could we ask, would you ask the audience a survey of their thoughts, and majority of them, are they for merger, staying single, or what?
Yeah, we definitely will. Folks, make sure to sign up your emails if you aren't already a member of our email list, and we'll definitely make sure. We've sent surveys out on this issue. We have found that more than 90 or 95% of the respondents that we've asked are against an FSU takeover. So. Yeah, we're building. This isn't the only meeting about. This is the first meeting. Right.
So I'm not saying that I'm going.
I think that speaks with the overwhelming view.
Concerned about that.
Yeah. Again, folks on the other side were invited to come, but they seem to prefer silence. It makes you wonder why. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you. Support our party, join us, and thank you so much to our panel. Hey, thank you.